Hey everybody, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I am Dr. Erin.
And I cannot figure out why I turn my head every single time I do that. So
I try not to now because you brought it up. I'm just like, don't move your head. Don't move your head.
If somebody wants to psychologically analyze why I do that, then I would be getting more psychological analysis and help than June Osborne.
Heyo.
Speaking of, we are here at Abbey Research are empathy educators, and it may seem a little bit weird that we're talking about The Handmaid's Tale to do that, but go with us. So we love culture, both popped and lived, and believe that a huge part of how we understand humans is the art that we consume. And so that is why we spend a lot of time talking about art here on this channel, and lived culture as well. Stories are how we change, and we want to help facilitate more stories into more ear holes. We do it with everything from talking about systemic racism in Bridgerton and how it was or was not treated, to exactly what happily ever afters look like in Hallmark Christmas movies, and what can we learn about structured joy as an important element in human life. This video or podcast, depending on where you are hearing the sound of our voices, is something that we love doing. But more than just talking about it, we love hearing what you think. So please comment, get in touch, share, tweet, subscribe, whatever, and tell us what you're thinking about these events.
You are all so very welcome to the OG Good Doctors content. Our coverage of The Handmaid's Tale is the reason why we started a YouTube channel. So we've been at this for a long time. We have so many very dedicated listeners and viewers and subscribers, and we love this journey with you. We would not still be on this journey without you because
True statement.
We would have given up, but we are not giving up. We are on to season 4, episode 7, Home, alternately titled by Dr. Erin, in all caps at the top of her notes, Why Hasn't June Seen a Counselor? So we are not going to deal with the events at the end of this episode in which that deal with June and Luke. We will refer you instead to our Handmaid's Tale Live with Dr. Nadine Thornhill, which we did last Friday, June 4th. It will be up on the YouTubes for you to see our rants and discussions, and Dr. Nadine's expert, and I mean that because she is a sexuality educator, expert analysis and discussion of what did and did not take place in that scene. So aside from that, what happens in this episode? We're in Canada with June, and this is a what not to do episode in terms of reintegration and trauma. That basically covers it. Are we in Gilead in this episode at all? I don't think so. No, we are not.
No, we don't go back to Gilead.
We don't go to Gilead. We get a little bit of Serena and Fred and their machinations that move us towards the two of them realizing that they are stronger together, especially against June now that she has arrived and is going to testify against them. We get a lot of performative religiosity from both of them. I'm not sure. I believe it's authentic in either of them, but I think
it is for Fred. I do think it is for Fred.
Fair dues. I just wrote quoting scripture, Boko Rama, in my notes. But that's me and my dislike of Fred Waterford. So we get June dropped in Canada, and dropped into a whole mess of things that don't go well. So Dr. Kristen, what struck you in Why Hasn't June Seen a Counselor, episode 7?
The show has asked us to believe that the Canadian government and her citizens have dedicated nearly a decade of resources to freeing refugees from Gilead, and yet have no system in place to integrate them into society.
To do it in a way that's trauma-informed.
Or trauma-informed, which I don't believe. Okay, it makes me so mad because you want me to believe that this is a realistic world. Cool. You've certainly tried to make it realistic. And yet you're telling me that there's not a single trauma-informed counselor or mental health professional in the nation of Canada, right now in this real time, there has been more care and emphasis and strategy based around how they're rolling out the vaccine in Canada than how this fictional Canadian government would be handling human beings. So I think it's really selling Canada short. I think when they first started talking about Canada, I was actually quite excited because I was like, Canada loves a system. Socialist governments love a system.
So many systems.
So good, when people get there, they're going to be they're going to be flung into their own accord and expected to rewrite their entire traumatized brain by themselves.
And
or in support groups with other traumatized people who have also not been given the tools.
Like led by a traumatized person. So my perspective as a person who studies incarceration, right? June has been incarcerated for, as we learned in this episode, 7 years. In Gilead, incarcerated, raped, tortured, beaten, incarcerated. And the first thing we see happen is she gets taken to this swanky hotel in downtown, presumably Toronto, and given we brought your favorite foods. Oh, you can get like massages and all this.
Do we know that she could even like digest half that cheese? Like
she hasn't. Yeah, like she's been eating Galadian food. She has been living in a world that is devoid of stimulation.
That's her first shower in 7 years.
Yeah, and like, sure, the first shower probably felt great, and parts of old June were like, yeah, that's awesome. But like, it just reminds me of the storyline in The Shawshank Redemption.
I knew you were going to go there, because that's where I was too.
Where, and I don't remember the super old dude's name, but like his whole adult life he had been incarcerated, and he finally got released. He finally got set free, and there was no process for him to be reintegrated in a way that was trauma informed, and he did not know how to function in quote unquote average normal society, and he died by suicide. And he wasn't the only one, because it was this like apartment that they were all given the same job in the grocery store, and like Morgan Freeman's character realizes that like there were a lot of men who came out of that prison who died by suicide in that room because there was no support and understanding that they might need help and a process to reintegrate. You can't just drop somebody back into their old life and say, aren't you happy to be in your old life? And so like Luke setting up a romantic dinner, like she
could
should
have crawled through the screen and punched him in the face.
She should not be alone in intimate situations, intimate, even emotionally intimate, with any of these people from her old life. Like, y'all know that we have not been the biggest June Osborne fans for the last 2 seasons of this show. My heart was breaking for her in this episode. You cannot put her in those situations where no one is asking her what she wants. Her last 7 years of life, she has not had agency or control or consent. And you drop her in a situation and tell her how everything is going to be. No.
Well, there's a little bit of a balance. So, because the other thing is when they did give her a choice, they gave her too many options.
Yes.
So like one of the ways to do reintegration is to make some decisions for them. This is where you're going to live. This is the schedule we're going to ask you to keep. And then you teach them again how to make decisions. So we're going to go home now. Moira and I live together. You're going to have this bedroom, but we brought 4 different quilts and we'd love you to choose which one you want.
Yeah.
Like that's how this is done. And it wasn't.
Yeah. And I mean, like the things that they didn't get her consent on, I think were the little things that you mentioned. Like you never asked her if she wanted Luke to stay with her.
Correct.
He just got to stay with her because that was her husband. You never asked her if she was comfortable. Like she wanted to be with Nicole. Yeah, 100%. But nobody asked her if she was comfortable going and living with Moira and Luke. Like there are different ways to do that where she still gets to make decisions and also be protected.
And they didn't balance that at all.
There's no balance.
We also want to say too that there's this reintegration, and then there's also just culture shock. It happens whenever somebody transitions cultures. It's normal. We were even saying that like the first time we got back from Belfast and went to an American supermarket or to a Bed Bath and Beyond or a Target, it's so overstimulating because nothing is as big anywhere else in the world.
No, I like walked in and walked back out of that Bed Bath and Beyond because I was like, nope, too much.
Yeah, the first time I went to a grocery store after 3 weeks in Kenya and Rwanda, I sat down in the middle of the peanut butter aisle and cried.
Yeah.
3 weeks.
And I understand, like, we're supposed to believe June is this like force of nature, right? She's super strong. She's really good at pushing through things. Like, we've seen that. And I think she was parts of her that were really interesting in this episode were her like pushing herself to like, I shouldn't be traumatized. Like, I connected with that. Like, I shouldn't have a problem readjusting to this. I want to do normal things. Gilead did not change who I am. And so, like, as upset as I was that they let her go grocery shopping, I think it was insightful for June to realize that this isn't, but like, what I would have loved to see is then someone support her after that panic attack.
Yeah, I just find it unfathomable that Moira and Luke are so oblivious.
So oblivious to any kind of trauma at all.
And also oblivious to how much they've become co-parents.
Yeah.
And the rhythms they move in. And what would that feel like for June, who's never been allowed to raise Nicole, to feel like here's another set of people that know her better than me. Mm-hmm. And then that, to me, that is reaffirmed when we hear her telling Nicole that her first daddy loves her. Mm-hmm. Later on, I kept waiting in this whole episode to bring up Nick. I'm glad she did on some level, but it was done in a way where I'm like, oh, we still haven't really processed that, have we? Okay.
No. Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think, and you know, I can see some of Luke's self-preservation in not wanting to bring up or talk about Luke or not Luke, Nick, and be honest about the fact that that baby was conceived in love through lots of consensual sex. So much. And I understand why, you know, he doesn't want to bring it up. He doesn't, but like, it's the reality of the situation. And like pretending that June didn't fall in love with another person and have sex and have a baby isn't super great either, buddy.
Everything just feels really unrealistic.
I think the thing that kind of broke me in this episode was after June took a shower for the first time in 7 years and the only robe in the swanky hotel was red.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Colors are traumatizing. And she was just like, I'll put on a red bathrobe because it's made out of silk. And I'm like, okay, show. Okay, show.
I had a lot of okay show moments. Just also like Fairmont is not just a fancy version of a Hilton. Like Fairmont hotels only appear in really wealthy cities. For example, there are 2 on the island of Bermuda. Like that's this chain. So we didn't just take her to the Hyatt that happens to be fancy. We took her to like the business, like the first class lounge. And in our Slack, I wrote like, man, baby steps, take her to a Hampton. Like, let her just get used to beds again. Yeah. And then take her to the place with the 3,000 thread count sheets and the really rich food room service. Luke didn't ask her what she wanted to eat when he ordered room service.
I know.
There's a lot of this that just feels like everyone is so excited to have her back that everyone is collectively, which to me is very unrealistic because again, other people would have entered this space, collectively going to pretend the last 7 years didn't exist. I know. And that's especially shocking for me with Moira, because we've already seen her be more compassionate to a child than to her best friend.
Yeah, and I think like I was just looking back at my notes to make sure we don't miss anything. And I think we get glimpses of this, that everyone experiences trauma in different ways. I like give me all the scenes of like Emily and Rita and Moira and June sitting around talking about it, but like talk about it. all they did was show us that June is angry and nobody else understands how to deal with June's anger.
Which is valid because they are traumatized themselves.
Yeah.
Luke's obviously had no training. None of the people we've been introduced to are capable of holding that much anger for somebody else.
Yeah. And I think the last thing we do have to talk about, even though we already talked about it in the live, but whatever, we're going to talk about it again, is the scene with June and Serena right before the end of the episode.
Yes.
Because we've discussed this offline, like Elizabeth Moss has the Scientology magic. She's
somehow, man,
carrying this show. Like, as much as I dislike parts of June, her performance is like unlike anything I think either of us have ever seen. And that scene where she confronts Serena, she is June Osborne.
It was a masterclass that I struggle to find words for. I also appreciate just the blatant, this is who Serena is.
Yeah.
And in the same way that Aunt Lydia and June are two sides of the same coin, so are Serena and June.
Yeah. And like they are making a lot of those parallels, especially with June's like testimony to Tuello about who Serena is. And I'm like, and the show was real on the nose with that, like showing June as well. But I was like, are you talking about yourself or Serena?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that those three women are the most compelling characters in terms of driving the trauma narrative forward. They're not the heroes of the show. I still stand by Rita, Moira, and Emily for that. But the show is about those three women in so many ways.
Yeah.
And how June is both of them. And in another life and in two twists of the fate's wheel, she could have easily been either one of them. Because if y'all don't think she would have been exactly like Aunt Lydia if she was an aunt, playa please, that would have been June.
Just watch episode 8. Just what? It's the most Lydia June.
Yep.
And that's certainly where the show is going. But I mean, even though in our heart of hearts we're not big June Osborne fans, when she tells Serena that I hope God kills the child in your womb.
It wasn't even I hope. It was when God kills the child, which was like,
in your womb, you will feel a fraction of the pain we felt when you tore our children from our arms. That is who June Osborne has been since the moment they stole Hannah. That is not who the show has shown us she's been. Consistently. But boy, are they hammering that point home right now.
And I think, okay, so that brings up something for me. How June is processing all of this is completely and utterly valid. That June even vacillates and has different responses and is totally valid. So when we say that June pisses us off, I want to clarify that really what we're annoyed about is that they haven't put the story structures in place to truly and effectively tell us what's happening with June.
To support all the work that Elizabeth Moss is doing.
Everything that she has ever done on a very honest trauma theory level makes complete sense.
Total sense. You're right. That's a really good point.
The show has not done the work to convince me that they know that any of those things are trauma responses.
It's lacking a depth.
Elizabeth, like all the performances are bringing like the Adriatic Trench worth of depth.
But the show lacks a depth of understanding about these issues.
And about humans in general?
Yeah. Yes.
It's not hard to find trauma theory either. I would love to direct you to the tome, The Body Keeps Score by Basil DeKalb. Like everybody reads this book. It is quoted over and over again. I've yet to see evidence that anyone in that writer's room has read it.
Yeah. That's such an important distinction. And I think it's taken us a while to get there. But I agree with you. I'm more angry at the show than I am June Osborne because
I don't actually. Somebody commented that like if we hate June so much, why are we still watching? Which is a totally valid comment, and it made me think like, but I don't hate her.
Right.
I hate that the show isn't treating her correctly.
And the show keeps throwing these traumatized, fascinating humans into situations that the show doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And so they're not giving them the words that they need to like actually have these conversations. If this show was actually talking about trauma and reintegration, God, would I love it.
I would force everyone who has stopped watching to start watching it again.
Yeah, but they're just doing a disservice to these characters and to the topics that they're like brushing over.
That's the summary. That's it.
Yeah.
We're pretending we're having a conversation about trauma, and what we're really having is a conversation about how to wrap up a show when you have no plan.
We see you, Bruce Miller. We see you and we're calling you out.
I will stand every single one of these performances, maybe not Alexis Bledel's, until the end of time. It's going to take me a hot minute to dive into anything that man does again.
Mm-hmm.
He has entered the skeptical level of Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cruz.
And Benioff and Weiss.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Benioff and Weiss are completely canceled. I will never go anywhere near them.
Oh, you're still like questionable about Bruce Miller? Okay.
I am, because he hasn't tied it up yet.
Right. We haven't we can't make that decision yet.
I can't make that decision. And like, to me, what Damon Lindelof did with The Watchmen, it wasn't like for me, but it proves to me he can tell a story.
Right. He did something else recently too that I thought was pretty good.
The Leftovers.
Yeah, there was something else though. His name was on, I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But anyway, yeah, he's like.
So I'm skeptical on Bruce Miller. I need to see how he brings this thing in for a landing. Do you go the Benioff and Weiss route? Which, speaking of Benioff and Weiss, I would like to remind everybody of our standing agreement with you, the viewers. We will do an entire video on Benioff and Weiss and our feelings about the women in Game of Thrones once we hit 1,000 subscribers here on the YouTubes.
We need subscribers.
So if you want to hear exactly why we have distanced ourselves so far from those two individuals, we'd love to tell you, but we got to get to 1,000 subscribers first. So back to Bruce Miller. I'm gonna do him the benefit of the doubt on a certain level until the end of the show. I'd love to go back and eat my words. I'm still gonna say you didn't do the work along the way, no matter how this comes out. But I would love to see that some evidence that someone has read a trauma theory book or watched a TED Talk. There's a bunch of them.
There's a lot. And you know, we should point out that as we're filming this, one of our dear commenters, Roxanne, mentioned that she saw an interview recently, we're in the beginning of June here, that talked about the impact of COVID on this season.
That's a good point to bring up.
And we totally recognize the COVID of it all. The COVID happened while they were filming. And so they had to shut down and then come back and finish. That's why we lost 3 episodes this season. That's why characters appear and disappear, because there was some travel restrictions. We talked about this before we filmed this recap. We have a lot of grace for the COVID impacting filming, 100%. The issues that we have are not with necessarily as much plot as character development, and that is something that the COVID did not have to impact.
Because, or even so in this episode, the last 2 episodes, we don't know where Janine is.
Yeah,
there could have been a very quick, if you couldn't get her for these 2 episodes,
right,
or you wanted like a little ADR about like Moira tried to find Janine and couldn't, like at least remind us that you
know where she is.
There's ways around this in post-production. If I can figure out how to do ADR in GarageBand, I really feel like professional folks could figure out how to drop a line or 2 in. My God, do like some of these things, it would be easy to say like, oh, why is nobody going to therapy? Give me a television reporter saying all the therapists have resigned from the government of Canada. Like, do something.
Yeah, and like, you know, Twello goes to talk, like that's the thing that gets me about like June, right? Even in this episode, now that you brought up Janine, you know, Twello's like helping her, this is what's going to happen, and then he comes back to get her testimony. If you couldn't get the actress that plays Janine for 2 episodes, have June ask, but June doesn't even ask, have you heard anything about Janine? Have you guys been able to find her? Like, you know, they have spies all around the Gilead. like hat tip that the show knows that they left Janine in a pile of rubble and haven't picked her back up yet. So like you don't have to have the person physically there to have them a part of the story.
And you had enough time in post-production of this season to also get over your own trauma of COVID, which right. Again, as a businessy person, it was massively traumatic. But ADR could have been dropped in December when all of us were on a little bit more even keel. So they've just made choices to not treat their characters as human beings after many years of actually attempting to do so. And so that, to me, that's why this feels like very weird narrative whiplash.
Yeah, it's very jarring. This season feels like we've been on a roller coaster the whole time, and not just like the ups and downs, but like the constant.
Yeah. And really briefly, I'm just going to say this and then we'll wrap up. I may have bought that the Testaments was trying to make, like the show was trying to make the Testaments happen until this episode. And now I am just that Aunt Lydia and the Testaments Aunt Lydia.
Can't happen. Be sure and watch our live if you didn't for our lengthier discussion of the Testaments and its relationship with the show. But they are making the Hulu has bought the rights to produce the Testaments into a show. So one would think they might try and connect those, but that's not the Ann Dowdness that we're getting from Lydia.
It certainly doesn't feel that way
at all
on any level, or how she's playing her performance. So it's just really, it's like a parallel so we have now the multiverse of Gilead somehow.
Multiverse. Are we gonna get like 6 versions of Aunt Lydia, like
all fighting and pointing at each other like that Spider-Man meme? One can only hope. The Lydia into the Gilead verse. Can't wait. That's a fantastic place to end.
Yeah.
So if you like this video, please do the YouTube-y things. The thumbs up really helps the algorithm. If you haven't subscribed, we would deeply appreciate it. Also, because we would like to do that video about the women of Game of Thrones. It would be a blast. So help us get to 1,000 subscribers. Tell your friends. We'd really, really love to have you join us. Comment below as always. And we will see you next time for episode 8.
Whew. Take care, everybody. Take a breath. We'll see you then.